Hello everyone, I hope you're doing fine. My name is Skyline, and today we're going to be talking about the exciting topic of how to prevent yourself from paying thousands of dollars in hospital bills in the future because you played too many video games. And ergonomics and all that boring stuff. So, alright, thank you, Dumpling. You've served your purpose. Get out of here. Alright, so I know that you've heard stuff about you gotta use your mouse properly, you have to use your keyboard properly, all that stuff before, but it's kind of hard because there are a lot of myths involved, and a lot of it doesn't really apply to gamers necessarily. It's like talking about typists. Most of the research is done in the workplace. So basically what I did is a friend of mine was nice enough to provide me access because he's a PhD student, or she's a PhD student. She has access to all these articles, all these databases. So I was able to take a look at all this carpal tunnel research and try to translate it for people who play video games, because most of it, like I said, is for office workers and people who type a lot, not necessarily people who are aiming in FPS games. So I will put all of my sources in the description, although you probably can't read them because they're all in paid databases. So first, the mouse. How do you hold the mouse? There are 3 different grips. We've gone over them before. Well, actually, we went over 2 before, but we'll go over the 3rd now. So look at all this blue lighting, by the way. It looks almost surreal. All right, so the first way is palm grip. And that's simply you put your entire hand over the mouse, your palm goes straight on it, like that, and you move it around. Your fingers are locked, so there's no wiggle room here. You have to use your wrist or your entire arm, and that's that. Next is the claw grip, which is basically the exact same thing, except these 2 fingers are tucked up, and not quite as much of your palm is on the mouse. This gives you a little bit more control because you can move your fingers a little bit. Look at that. In addition to moving your arm. Finally, there's the grip that I use, which is the fingertip grip, which is where you don't put your palm on the mouse at all. You just put your fingers on it and move it like this. I think that this is actually the healthiest grip, personally, because it does not require you to move your wrist. You can just move your arm, and then your fingers, your wrist, doesn't need to actually move. See, I'm holding my wrist exactly where it is, and yet I can still move the mouse. Easy. So then, you probably already knew that. Let's get into a little bit more detail. So, the most important thing to not screw up your wrist, and by the way, why is this important? Why is this even important? It's important because even though you might be, a lot of people watching me are around my age, like 18 to 25-ish. Some people are older, so they're starting to, in the 30s maybe. There are a lot of people, though, that are in their 16, 17, 18, even 15 and younger. I can tell YouTube tells me how old you are, although nobody ever tells YouTube that no one ever answers that they're younger than 18 anyway. So I assume that there's a lot more under 18 people who watch this than admit it. But it might not be important now. But when you get older, when you grow up, when you become a big boy, you don't want to be paying thousands of dollars in hospital bills over wrist surgery and hand surgery because you didn't use proper ergonomics and form while you were playing all your video games when you were younger. So this is very important, possibly the most important video of your entire life. That's definitely not true. So now, back to the original topic. The most important thing to not screw up your wrist is what a lot of people do. A lot of people, alright, so you can't really see it, but notice how you can tell when my hand is tense. Everything is really tense, and especially if you're playing with a heavier mouse, or maybe just a worse mouse, or maybe you're just very focused, maybe you're a really hardcore wrist aimer, they do this. They grab it really hard, and they, like their wrist is flexed. Their wrist is flexed. This is especially also true for people with very high sensitivities because they can't move their mouse very far. Like they're only working with a space this big, so their wrist is constantly flexed. There's tension in this part because I'm flexing it to make these small movements. That is the worst thing you can possibly do. Your wrist should be 100% loose, not flexed at all. You should not have any tension in here, literally none. If you have any then that's a good way to go to the hospital in 10 years. Next is where you are resting on the table. So this is a kind of a big deal. Some people rest like this. Here. This is very, very bad. You can't be resting on your tendons here. You're either like this, so you're not even resting on the table at all. That's not what I do, but that's probably the objectively best way to do it, is by doing like this. That way nothing is resting on the table. Or to use either this part or this part. You can tell that I use this part a lot. Wow, that looks really red. It's not actually that red in real life. Wow, that looks quite bad. It's much less noticeable off the camera because of all this blue light. So here there's nothing except for fat, and here it's kind of the same way, just bone and fat. So I rest my hand here, like that. So there's absolutely no pressure at all on these tendons whatsoever. It's all here. You could, like I said, also rest it on this part. This is actually probably a lot better because this is really, really cushioned. This is not so much, which is why you get the issue there. If I was resting my hand like this, you would probably absolutely not be able to tell at all. Next is the angle of your arm. So right now, it doesn't need to be a 90-degree angle like this. It doesn't need to be like that. This angle can be kind of whatever you want it to be. But the important part is that this arm is straight. Not like this, not like this, straight. And so that has to do completely with your chair height. So of course, hopefully you have an adjustable chair. Right now, you can see my arm starts here and goes straight across. That's very important. And now, of course, this is something you probably already know, but when you aim, you should be aiming mostly, look, with your arm. My wrist not moving. My wrist staying completely still. Now, the advantage of using the fingertip grip or the claw grip is that you actually have a little bit of wiggle room. Notice I can move my fingers and my wrist does not move either. That's why I personally prefer the fingertip grip, because I can move with my arm, and then so I can move with my arm, slight adjust with my fingers. Move with my arm, you can see my mouse pad. Move with my arm, slight adjustment. Move with my arm, slight adjustment. If you have a palm grip, the issue there is that you're 100% aiming with your arm, so that might be uncomfortable for some people. You should not do this thing. Notice this thing. This is not good. Plus, also, fun fact, and I learned this in art class in 6th grade. So notice that when you move your wrist, notice the path that this takes. It's a circle. It's like this. It's rounded. Your wrist does not move in a straight line. So if you aim with your wrist, it's not as good, because look at how the cursor goes. This is just me moving my wrist back and forth. See how it's curved? Yes. You aren't going to go straight if you aim with your wrist. That's why the arm is much better at making straight lines. The only other thing is that make sure your wrist is straight, like this. It should not be bent that way, or it should not be bent this way. So right now my wrist is straight. Wrist is straight while I'm moving. It's not like this. It's not like this. Straight. And they actually sell wrist braces that do work. A study proven to work. They sell wrist braces that will force your wrist to stay straight. So if you have an issue with this, if you have a bad habit, buy them. It's only 10 bucks, 15 bucks. There's one that I found that has good reviews. I'll link that down below. But they do work 100%. Well, I mean, always be a little bit skeptical of any studies that are trying to sell you something or trying to say that a certain product is good, but they're only 10 bucks. I think it's worth the risk. It should help. Plus, keeping your wrist straight is also proven to be a big thing. One more thing to note is do not use, I don't even own one, but those like jelly wrist pads that people used to sell, or they still sell at office supply stores. They're supposed to help with your wrist. You know, you like lay your wrist on it and then you're supposed to do that. Those are literally the worst thing, because what those do, all they do is they lock your arm. So you can't move your arm anymore, and you're forced to only move your wrist, and that will kill you pretty badly. Also, some people recommend you play like this with your entire arm on the desk, and that's better. And it is better if you're only using your wrist, which is really bad though. The problem with this, again, it locks your arm, so you can't move your arm. You have to use your wrist in this case. So, like I said, ideally you float above the table. You know what I'm talking about. Just don't use the wrist guards. They're really bad. Anyway, on to the keyboard. Here we are, the keyboard, the left hand. Or, you know, if you're left-handed, then you might have a different setup. But anyway, as far as the arm goes, it's the same concept. The arm should be, well, I have my camera, I have the keyboard moved a little bit compared to how it normally is. There you go. You can see it better here. This is a straight line. We're not doing this. That's bad. We're not doing this. That's bad. We're doing this. Now, I'll say what you should do if you're typing. So if you're typing, your hands should not be resting. Your hands should be up, like this, and like that. So you're moving your arms, not your wrist, to type. This does not apply to Overwatch or other FPSs because your hand mostly just stays here, in this area. It doesn't move. But if you're playing a game like StarCraft, for example, where you need to use the entire keyboard, that would be relevant. Your hand should be floating above the keyboard, not like resting on it and pivoting. That's not good. So once again here, ideally, you are not resting your hand. I just sit up straight here for in my normal posture. You should not be resting your wrist or anything. This is very bad. Never rest that against the desk. Also, this is actually important for keyboards. Your wrist should be straight. Not up, not down. Don't elevate your keyboard. My keyboard doesn't actually have stands, but don't elevate your keyboard because the result is now your wrist is up. Your wrist is up there, and you want to keep it straight, down, flat. That's why I like this flat keyboard. I know that some keyboards will not be able to support this correctly because a lot of mechanical keyboards are raised up a little bit. At least the keys are higher than this, so you should be floating above. This should not be touching anything. Your wrist should be 100% straight, and you should just be hitting the keys with your fingers, obviously. Again, your wrist should not be tense. You should not... usually people don't have an issue with this with the keyboard because it's mostly their fingers, but just, you know, don't be tapping down with your wrist. Be tapping down with your fingers only. For me, if you have a very flat keyboard like me where you can rest your hand down, technically you shouldn't, but I do still. Either rest your hand here or here. Notice that I don't have a mark here because I actually don't rest my hand as much with my keyboard as my mouse. Next, this is also important. This doesn't have to do with carpal tunnel, but it will help you a lot with your neck. So here you can see I'm sitting straight, looking straight. And my monitor is too low. A lot of people have their monitors too low, I noticed. So up like that, so that now when I'm looking, well, maybe a little bit lower. When you're looking, you should be looking straight about here, the top third. So now I can look straight at the monitor. I have my arms, you can see, straight, like that. My wrists are straight, aligned, and now I can play games. I can pwn noobs now. And so this is the complete setup. Now, my chair kind of sucks. My chair sucks a lot, actually. It really, really helps. You can either stand up straight out, you can either sit straight on your own, or it really helps to have a nice, good chair that you can lean back on. That's pretty helpful too. But for me, if you just have like a really crappy chair like me, then you have to just sit straight. The last thing I will remark on, though, is that it does matter what peripherals you use. And so I'm not going to go over individual reviews talking about mice and keyboards. Maybe you noticed that I do have a very strange keyboard. Not a lot of people use this one. And I actually need to buy a new one. I've had this for so long. I'm going to buy an identical one to it. But we'll go over specifics in maybe another video with reviews or something. But your peripherals do matter. Getting a nice light mouse. I know a lot of mouses have weights in them that you can, well, customizable weights where you can make the mouse as heavy as you want or whatever. No, it's light. You want your mouse to be very, very light. That way you don't put any pressure at all on your wrist trying to move it around. And with the keyboard, you don't want the junky keyboards that like come with your computer that are really hard to press down. It's like $50 for a decent keyboard with good switches that don't kill your fingers pressing down on it. But still, if you use proper technique and you press down with your fingers instead of your wrist, it will help even if you don't have that great of a keyboard. Ideally, a lot of people, of course, like mechanical keyboards. I like the type of keyboard I have where it's like a laptop-y like keyboard for writers. But definitely pay attention to your peripherals, especially your mouse. If you have a bad mouse, you're going to have to struggle a lot. If you don't have a lot of room on your desk, or if you have a small mouse pad, you won't have a lot of room to aim you won't have a lot of room to aim. So a lot of people will run high sensitivities. Like we said before, that's not very good for your wrist. And then, of course, your chair is very important. I need to upgrade my chair at some point to be more supportive, because right now it's basically a stool, essentially. And I think that's just about it. Of course, take breaks, do stretches, but nobody does that. Nobody does that. And I know that me saying it isn't going to convince you to do it. So do stretches and stuff if you remember. If you remember. It's good to do, but you already knew that. A lot of people say that. Besides that, of course, just be good, physically fit in general. Go exercise, run, go to the gym, all that stuff. Anyway, guys, I hope that I wasn't too boring or that I did not miss anything. I am like 99% sure as far as questions. But if I did, of course, leave it down below. I hope you enjoyed. I know it's kind of dry, kind of boring, but it is very important. If you learn this one time, you'll be set for the rest of your life using computers in the workplace, for video games, anything like that. So, never forget to stay positive and have a great day. See you soon.